Hello everyone, today I'll be doing a comprehensive Navy guide in Hearts of Iron 4. To begin, I would like to say that Navy is still a rather complex subject, so I'll try my best including timestamps and sections so you can easily navigate if you know stuff a bit better or a bit less good. They should be in the video by now. Now, I want to begin the video by just explaining the basics of Navy. You can feel free to skip ahead if you know the basics. Essentially, Navy in Hoi4 is organized in a sort of system. There are task forces, which are these right here, and then there are fleets. A fleet is composed of 1 to 10 task forces. For a fleet, when you select a fleet, you can assign an admiral. The admiral will give bonuses to the ship's ability to fight, and essentially it just enhances your task force in specific tasks. When you select a fleet or a task force, you have orders you can give. These orders go from naval exercises, patrol, strike force, convoy raiding, escort, mine laying, mine sweeping, and naval invasion support. When you assign an order to your fleet, for all orders except the naval exercises, you must assign a region. You can do so by, with your selection, right-clicking a sea zone. We must also give them an order. Now, each order has different things. Naval exercises will just make them go out to sea and practice, and that way they would increase their proficiency in combat and give you naval XP, which can be used to design more ships later. Patrol makes your ships patrol the seas and look for other enemy fleets and convoys. Then, with Strike Force, well, patrol could also engage, but Strike Force is generally when another ship, radar, or air finds an enemy fleet. The Strike Force, if you assign it to a big fleet, they would go out of port and go try to sink the enemy ship. After they sunk it, they will return to port and keep waiting for more people to spot enemy ships. Convoy raiding is essentially a submarine-only action that, well, it's not only submarines, but it's much more effective with submarines. It essentially sinks convoys and blocks trade paths. As you can see, this is the path convoys take to deliver resources and equipment. If you were to sink them with a country you're at war with, they cannot get any equipment that is not land connected, and thus can be pretty good in many circumstances. Convoy escort would make your selected task force or fleet follow convoys. Like, it would make them follow your convoys in order to try to counter enemy submarines. However, do remember that you cannot do this with any ships, as you must make anti-submarine destroyers. Mine laying is when you have ships that can lay mines. They would put mines in these sea regions, and then the enemy ships would be affected and damaged by your mines. Mine sweeping is the opposite. You're trying to sweep up what the enemy's laid out, and thus make a clearer passage for your ships. Finally, naval invasion support is when you're trying to do a naval invasion. Your fleet or task force you've selected will follow the naval invasion order to its destination, and in the way it would ensure that the naval invasion is not vulnerable to any enemy convoy raiding or other fleets. Once they have arrived to the tile they're attacking, they can supply shore bombardment, and once they've taken a tile, if it's a port, they can also provide supplies. So overall, you definitely want to assign a pretty big fleet on that when you're doing naval invasions. Now, we've covered how fleets are organized and what each thing does. But now, how do we actually organize the Navy, you may ask? Well, what I like to do whenever I start my Hoi4 games, well, besides all the other stuff, but for Navy-wise, what I like to do is press Shift and left click. So, you shift, left click. So you shift, left click, all of this. And boom, right here, we have selected all of them. Now you want to go on your left over here, and you want to click this button, or press G on your keyboard. This will merge all the task forces into one fleet. However, there is certain size limitations, which is why I will show you a couple of tricks. So you must let the game on pause, and the fleet's going to reorganize itself into the location. By the way, you can right-click a location as long as you have C-axis. You can right-click a place to decide where your fleet goes. As you can see, all my ships from over here are going down here to try to merge with the East Indies fleet. And this fleet is going to go over here. So they're meeting midway and they're going to reach in England. The fleet has arrived in the port we set up in southwest England. We have 235 of our ships right here. You may notice, what is this? What is this for here? This is the reserves. Now, something I found not very practical when I was on the Navy is how there's always a reserve for our fleet. And I was wondering what I could do to fix that. But the truth is, you can't really. You can't have more than a certain amount in a task force. They will always eject reserve unless you would manually assign them. A solution to this would be to increase the amount of destroyers. But again, it's only to a certain point you're allowed to put destroyers in task force. So you may be asking, how am I supposed to organize this then? Well, it's quite simple. What you must do first is separate your submarines from your surface fleet, because either way they're going to be in complete different orders and they're never going to be in the same fleet or task force. So you can press this little cancel thing, and boom, as you can see now, our fleet is much more organized and we have all these reserves. Now I would select the submarine reserves like this and assign them to their separate theater. I like to call it subs. Now you want to make sure you've gotten rid of every single submarine. Still some here. Alright, after you select something, just right click it to move to somewhere else. Now all of these, I want to keep them there. So now that we've properly sorted out the submarines and saved some space, now we should be able to merge it in full our surface fleet. And there we go. 200 out of 200. And now we have submarines as well. So generally, what I like to do is have it in separate theaters. Theaters like this. So I like to call it surface fleet, the next one subs, and then another one I like to call is anti-submarine warfare. But before I can explain to you how anti-submarine warfare works, I want to quickly explain how Navy stats work. If you look at your designs here in your production, we can look at our battleship, the Admiral class Mark 1. Just look at it. And right here you can see there's many different stats. The main important stats are the combat stats and the base stats, like these right here. So every surface fleet, well, every ship in general has all these stats. Either it's 0 or not, they still all have them. So max speed determines how fast your ship can go max. And why is this important, you may ask? Task forces are only as fast as your fastest ship. So certain missions may be very annoying to do if you have a very slow ship in the midst. That's why if you have a very specific task force, like I have an idea I'll show you after, you want to have very speedy ships. For example, a spotting task force would have extremely fast ships compared to a regular surface fleet. Because with spotting, you don't want to engage, you just want to spot and know as much about the sea you're fighting in as possible. Thus is the reason for the fast ships. Now you may be wondering, what actually gives these stats? Well, what gives them is these components right here. And these components, you can research them. I'll show you more about the stats, then we'll see how research affects components. So here is range. If you were to select a fleet, you can see these red checkers here. This is because your task force, your fleet, at least one of my ships in here cannot reach this region. Because, yeah, the ships cannot, the distance is too large between the closest port and this region. And since we're the British, we have ports all over the world, which is why it's not that difficult to go over here. It's primarily in the dead center of the entire world's oceans that we have extreme difficulty in. You may be wondering, well, we have half the thing, it's not full, so you could still go. And if I right click, you can see that they can still go there. But their efficiency will be severely reduced as it's part red. To fix this, you can make a specific task force or fleet that is pre-composed to have longer range. You'd have to individually look at your ships and look which one's the slowest, which one has less range, and separate them into different fleets. Now, organization is how much you can fight for, essentially. Because combat in Hoi4 is organization-based. Once organization reaches 0, every ship retreats. Every army does that. And planes work a bit different, but generally it's always regarding organization. Ships and ground forces are like that as well. So in essence, losing organization too fast will make you lose the naval battle. Now here we have the HP, which is probably one of the most important stats. HP is how much the ship can take before it gets sunk completely, not fixable. Now, there are different things that change how much certain stuff works. Reliability is about how prone your ship is to have malfunctions. Having the higher reliability will make it so your ship works and doesn't malfunction most of the time. You want this to always be above 70, or else it's going to be quite a waste. Manpower is how much manpower it takes, and supply use is how much supply it consumes per day. This is somewhat tied with fuel usage. Now, we're going to get into the combat stats. So, in Hoi4, Navy works in a way, essentially, that there are ships in front and behind. When two countries go to war, well, actually, I should show you really quick. Right there. So, in this example, we have declared war on Germany. I've explained the basics of some statistics, but I'd like to show you in action how the statistics work. With your Navy selected, your surface fleet, first of all, you want to assign an admiral, so we'll assign the best one we have. And we'll set them on strike force. Because, again, patrol is probably the best, but again, the problem will be how expensive the fuel usage will be. Having these guys constantly surveilling the seas is super expensive. And we simply can't afford that. Which is why we'll put them on strike force. So as you can see, we have assigned them to all these regions. And when we unpause, if they detect an enemy ship here, then ships will go and engage. Really quick though, we're going to cover these buttons. So again, this is what I just showed you when it cuts in half. This is the merge like I've showed you. This sets them to reserve. You don't really use this ever. And this deletes it, like physically gets rid of the ships. Why? I don't understand why you'd want to do that, but it's an option. Puts them into distributed task forces, each for their own, goal. But it's generally not done very well, and it's better to do it manually. This tells them to stop what they're doing, get repaired. This makes it so reserve ships, depending on your task force composition, they'll just come reinforce the sunken ships or damaged ships. This would split off the ships, so if in this task force you have a damaged ship, they would split off, go to reserves, get fixed, and if you have the reinforcement on, once they have finished being fixed, they will come back. This determines how prone they are to fight. For example, you might want to set this to never attack if you're a spotter, or always attack. It depends. But yeah, generally medium's good. And this determines how fast they should go. You could set it to never repair, and they literally just sink, which is not a great idea. For the submarines, we're also going to get a commander. We're going to get this guy. And he's going to do convoy raiding, so you can prevent German convoys from replenishing Germany. Before we get into an actual battle, there's a couple more stats I want to show you. Light attack would attack the ships in front of them, so would heavy. But essentially, what you want with the light attack is that the light attack hits the enemy ships, and assuming they don't have an armor value, the ships would sink. And then after, when you've sunken enough of the ships in front, those are called screens, you'd be able to start hitting the ships in the back, which are valuable ships. Those ships are called capital ships. And capital ships usually have a pretty high armor value. And armor value can prevent enemy attacks from going through. This is what piercing does, is how much is able to get rid of the armor value. If you subtract the armor value from the piercing value, you'll get the actual amount of damage it can inflict onto your ship's HP. So for most ships, having more armor is good, but armor comes at the cost of making your ship very, very slow. So it's honestly how you want to distribute, what you want to do. So yeah, now our ships are moving into position. As you can see, our submarines have detected a convoy right here. So the submarines, I want to show you this real quickly. So essentially right here, you can see statistics. This right here is depth charges, which are essentially just used by destroyers in order to sink submarines. This is why sometimes I'd like to create a separate theater that has destroyers fitted with depth charges and a patrol boat to ensure that we know where the submarines are and we're going to sink them. But yeah, submarines have something called torpedoes. And now, torpedoes, unlike light, heavy, armor, depth charges, blah, 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 they're very unique in the sense that they do not pass. For example, here, if we had our battleship here, they would be shooting at each other on the ground, on the sea here. And once all of these ships, the screens have been sunk, they'd hit the ships in the back. Here would be heavy ships, and here would be convoys and aircraft. However, with torpedoes, they go beneath and are able to sink the ships, which is why having a lot of torpedo attack is good, because you can bypass the screens. Screens are generally just to block off your heavy ships from being sunk. So if you unpause here, they are likely going to try to be sinking our submarines. See, they've successfully done so with their depth charges. But this little arrow thing means they're retreating. So yeah, they've retreated. The battle's over. And they've sunk one of our submarines. And here, they've sunk 2 of our submarines. Higher tech can help prevent this. Now, speaking of tech, let's show a bit of the tech and how it works. So, each ship, again, is based on the principle of having capital, a screen, or a submarine. At the base, there are templates. So there's submarines, carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Destroyers are the most versatile, as they can sink submarines, sink battleships, or protect big ships called capital ships. Destroyers are considered screens, meaning that they're the ships that go in front and block off the big ships. Cruisers, on the other hand, are varied. They could either also serve as a screen, or they could serve as a sort of battleship. It depends. But generally, they're like the middle option between a full-on battleship and a destroyer. Light cruisers, for example, are like destroyers, but a bit better. Generally, you want to make those very speedy and have a good spotting value. You generally use light cruisers in order to spot enemy ships and convoys. Battleships are the ones with the big guns, and the ones who are going to be the far back. These are extremely expensive to produce, and thus you want to make sure you have good destroyers and good screens to protect them. Carriers are like battleships, but they possess the ability to fit aircraft. Aircraft can be very, very useful within combat because it does not require the Navy stuff. And if you were to fit fighters and naval bombers onto your aircraft, you would be able to easily win every battle. Also, having aircraft carriers could permit you to naval invade having close air support, because they could take off directly from the sea, making it super effective for the battle you're trying to complete. As for the naval support, this just gives bonuses to all the different types of guns. So this would give it to light guns, medium guns, and heavy guns. This would give bonuses to torpedoes, making them stronger. This would generally help with keeping your ships from sinking. It's always good to have these techs no matter what, because it prevents them from instantly sinking. This is for naval invasions and making sure you can land more effectively, and this is for mine warfare and landmines. Sorry, this is actually for torpedoes as well, apparently. Now, if you were to unpause and progress time a bit, you can see right here this. This is because there's close air support trying to sink my submarines, but they cannot reach it because they don't have a good spotting value. So yeah, that's one stat we haven't covered, is spotting. Now, they're actually called sub-detection, the stat. It's called, right here, sub-detection. So, having a ship with high sub-detection will permit to be able to see all the enemy submarines underneath the water. But the higher this is, the more likely you are to find an enemy sub. So generally, if you want to counter submarines, what you want to do is take your fleet, like your main fleet, look for a light cruiser that has a good sub-detection value and can be very speedy. So we're going to look around. This one, the leader class. It's not the most effective by far, which is why we might make our own eventually. So you want to right click that ship, make a separate task force, and create this. I call this anti-subs, because I like to keep it organized. You don't have to call it that. You would assign some guy. This guy has spotters, so I'm going to use him, because he can spot better. And now with this specific ship, you want to put them on patrol and make them patrol the seas looking for enemy submarines. Now, also want to get some destroyers that have depth charges. Lots of depth charges. And you want to fill a bunch of destroyers with depth charges. So essentially, the meta would be essentially that this ship would go spot out all the submarines and tell it to our destroyers. Our destroyers would go out to the submarines, and then after, basically, it's continuous. It's a very effective method because this one spots, tells our destroyers, the destroyers go out and sink them, and you can do that pretty effectively if you have enough. Obviously, now nothing's going to happen because we have no actual destroyers with depth charges assigned to the mission. But once we are to build up a fleet that has that, I'll show you. You would go here. You would go to destroyers. Destroyers. And you want to put in as many depth charges as possible. Once you filled it to the brim with this, you could easily find them. Also, you want to get fire control systems and just add sonar. Having sub detection is always good because it helps find subs. Same thing with this one. If I were to make this design again, I would add sonar to find subs better. And I would get rid. And if this was personally my design, I would get rid of this and put aircraft facilities. Because max spamming aircraft facilities on a light cruiser is a very effective method for spotting. Let me show you. So here, in this hypothetical example, we've researched every tech. So I would take my most up-to-date destroyer hull and spam it with depth charges. As advanced as you can get them. We'll call this one the sub sinker. Let me put it with this. Now, you don't want torpedoes because those would be a waste. You're sadly forced to put a battery. So I just put the cheapest battery, a light battery. Anti-air, not needed. What you want, though, is the sonar. Now, if you have a high enough tech, you can also add radar, which is pretty good. It does exactly the same thing. Even better. And yeah. So there we go. We have max level subsinker right here. And we're going to assign it to the rating fleet. So now we are producing this. But we have to tell it where's it going to go. So we're going to put it in the anti-subs theater. And you can do this with every ship. So we're going to put this in surface. This in surface. This in surface. And so on. Now, if you've done this correctly, when the ships come out and you have this enabled, which we do not, but if you have this enabled and you make multiple task forces, like so, and you were to increase the task force to like 40 submarines, that's a good number, they would auto get assigned to this. And you wouldn't have to do anything besides set the assembly line or what theater to go to. And they kind of just go into the places you want them. So yeah, but we haven't got a single subsinker yet, so we're going to do that. So now, we have a bunch of destroyers waiting around. And again, if you haven't properly assigned them, especially if you have a sort of bigger fleet, I would just merge them like that. This one I would also assign to Strike Force. As for the rest of the fleet, this one right here, the subsinker, it's out. So we're gonna put this on Strike Force. Put this all the way to 40. Or we could do Convoy Escort. If your light cruiser isn't sufficient enough to detect things fast enough, just do Convoy Escort and we'll sink the convoys. Both work, but this would be more efficient if you get it set up properly, which we should do actually. So yeah, a good light cruiser design would be like taking this, essentially. Well, yeah, you want a fire, like a light fire thing. So I just put a light battery. But yeah, here is where you want the aircraft facilities. You want it filled to the brim with those, all the way. Then you want a rapid fire gun once again. Just get a cheap one. Sonar, radar, and yeah. So as you can see, we can even get rid of this. And this is literally the fastest possible. Spotting cruiser. Look at that, 41 kilometers, and it's extremely speedy. Put it like that, and we'll just do this. So yes, now it should come out pretty soon. I'm also gonna show you a couple destroyer designs that are very effective. So for combat, you could either spam like artillery things, like turrets, but I generally just do a bunch of torpedoes, like max it out in torpedoes, as you don't have to sync the enemy screens for that. And just, yeah. Depending on who you're fighting, you may want to add some anti-air, but again, it's kind of expensive. Yeah, this would be the expensive destroyer, the torpedo destroyer. And yeah, that's pretty good. Not the best. But you can also produce what people like to call tugboats. So these things are essentially cheap. Like cheap. Because as I've showed you in battle, the screens would go in front and the heavy ships at the back. So in order to eat up the enemy's damage, what you can do is make an extremely cheap boat. You even get outdated models, like a very, very early destroyer. Well, 1936. Because you don't want it to be that bad. But yeah. You take 1936 hull, you'd slap on a light battery, as cheap as possible. Well, yeah, here. And then, that's it. We'll just call this, like, I'm going to call it distraction. Because it's extremely cheap to produce. And you would produce this distraction in mass. Like, crazy amounts of distractions. Now for the submarines, you want to make this with a snorkel. Well, torpedoes first. You want maximum torpedoes. Then you want a snorkel to make yourself less visible. More torpedoes, and more engine. This is a very good submarine here because it would do a bunch of damage to convoys and it's not easily detected. And again, remember to assign them a specific theater to be assigned in so they get there smoothly. And now you want to take your surface fleet and ensure plenty of destroyers are added. So max that out right there. Same thing with this one. Max it out. Max it out this. And yeah, now our fleet should automatically be much, much stronger. Yeah, these are now super speedy. And they speed around and detect things really, really fast. And boom, we've detected some convoys, we're sinking them. But yes, so as the war progresses, we will eventually kill Germany's war support because they will have no more support because we literally raid all their convoys, like completely annihilate their convoys. But remember to protect other areas as well. Like if you have colonies, remember to protect colonies. But yeah, I do believe we have a naval combat. Yeah, we do, right here. With our anti-convoys stuff, we've sunk in 15 submarines, German submarines, that are trying to kill our convoys. There are also carriers in this. You just have to find the carrier. It's by this little airport icon. And you can click them. You can click where to put them, just like if they were regular airports. And then you could give them a mission as well. You have to make it go out of port. But yeah. And then with the mission, you could win it. It'd be factored into the combat results. As you can see here, they're being sunk extremely. That's pretty much how the basics of Navy work. You just balance it, make it into different categories to perform separate tasks, and you essentially just block off the sea access for your enemy. So now, if I wanted to end the war in Germany, I could create a Marine division with Marines. Something like this could work pretty good. And with this, you'd send them out, put your fleet on naval invasion support, and yeah, they'd be screwed. But yeah, that's the basics of Navy in Hoi4. There's still plenty more we haven't covered, but this is rather a beginner guide. If you want a more in-depth guide, please do tell me. And also, do you like Hoi4? Do you like me making this content? Let me know in the comments as well. Anyways, goodbye.